Hello and welcome to everyone. Today's webinar from the International Alliance of ALS M&D Associations is an update and question and answer from our Scientific Advisory Council. And my name is Kathy Cummings. I'm the Executive Director of the International Alliance. And I want to welcome everyone to our webinar, both live today and if you're watching the recording later. We do have captions being generated today in both English and Spanish. If you are watching live today, we will put a link in the Zoom chat so that you can turn the captioning on. And as I said, you can watch those captions in either English or Spanish. If you're watching the recording later on YouTube, if you go to the video description, you can activate the subtitles through YouTube as well. I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor Biogen, who sponsors our entire webinar series, and without their support, the work that the International Alliance does would not be possible. So a huge thank you to our sponsor of the webinar series, Biogen. I wanted to just quickly touch on our Scientific Advisory Council as a whole before we turn it over to our presenters today. We are very, very lucky to have a fantastic Scientific Advisory Council that works with the Alliance throughout the year to provide us with evidence-based information that we can then share both with the public and with our membership. And our chair of the Scientific Advisory Council is Dr. David Taylor, who's the Vice President of Research for ALS Canada and who will be moderating our webinar today. And the rest of the council you can see up on the screen, including our board liaison, Andrea Pauls-Backman from the Les Turner Foundation in Chicago. So I just wanted to highlight the SAC members as a whole. And if we flip to the next slide, then we can meet your panelists for today. As I said, Dr. David Taylor will be the moderator for today, and he'll be joined by Dr. Qing Liu from China, Dr. Kuldip Dave from the United States, Dr. Gethin Thomas from Australia, and Dr. Adriano Chio from Italy. So I will turn it over to David and they will introduce themselves properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Welcome to the SAC Q&A and update for the Alliance. I'm very pleased to be able to chair this session with three amazing colleagues, and hopefully we'll have a fourth as well a little bit later. Before I start, one of the things I just wanted to bring up is that, you know, it's always hard to find a balance between talking about things we're excited about, hope that we have, and also an acknowledgement that things are never going to be fast enough for people living with ALS. And so just a note that when we do talk about things that we're excited about with regard to research or with regard to things that are coming along, we do fully understand that and acknowledge the need for compassion around the fact that these are not moving as quickly as we need them to be moving. And just so you know that we all feel urgency here. And so I just wanted to level set that, to give us the opportunity again to maybe talk with some excitement about some of the things that have happened over the past 6 months. And so the way we like to do these is we actually go around the round table. We're going to have each of the individuals, my colleagues who have joined, to introduce themselves and then to briefly say something about what they're excited about in the past 6 months or currently in ALS research. And so without further ado, let's get going. So I thought maybe we could start with Dr. Liu, to maybe just introduce yourself and something that you're thinking about right now with regard to ALS research.
Okay, thank you, David. Well, I am Dr. Liu Qing from Peking Union Medical College Hospital in China, which hospital is the best known hospital in China. I'm a neurologist. I specialized in neurogenetics. And for disease, I'm mostly interested in ALS, motor neuron diseases. And for the past several years, I mean for over like 10 years, I really, did some work on this field, especially on the epidemiology and genetics aspect of ALS. For fuller work, I would like to do some study or research on new therapeutic medications, for example, like stem cell research and treatment for our patients. Okay, by now our team has some like special neurostem cell research on rats and mouse. Okay, these have some primitive, very good, optimistic therapeutic effects. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. And passing to Gethin.
Thank you, David. Gethin Thomas, I'm the Executive Director of Research for MND Australia. I think what's excited me most in the last year is that we've always known that the MND ALS research field is incredibly collaborative, very collegial, but we're actually seeing some concrete outcomes of that collegiality. We saw this year the Act for ALS passing with a considerable budget boost, which involved a number of organisations across the US, and in the UK we've seen the United for MND campaign, which has managed to leverage a promise of £50 million from the UK government, and that I think involved all the MND research organisations in the UK working together, as well as patient advocacy groups. And just to blow our own trumpet, in Australia we have managed to corral all our different research interests into forming an MND research collective as well, where we're all working together to identify priorities and share resources right across Australia. Thank you, David.
Great, thank you. Actually, I should add, and I think Jess has put this into the chat, that please put your questions in the Q&A section. But Gethin, if we don't get a lot of questions, we might revisit some of that, because I think there's an awful lot of things we can talk about when it comes to collaborative efforts and slowly the overall globalization of ALS work together, and obviously, you know, panels like this kind of represent that is really advancing over the past few years. So I'd like to pass over to Kuldip.
Hi everyone, Kuldip Dave, Senior Vice President of Research at the ALS Association. Nice to meet you all, and nice to have you. David, what I'm most excited about is the sort of the news in the world right now around the approval of Albrioza, or formerly known as AMX0035 in Canada. And, you know, we are thrilled for Canadians living with ALS that they are going to have access to this drug. The ALS Association supported this drug very early on through Ice Bucket funds, and we're really excited to see it get approval in Canada. We are concerned about the lack of access for Albrioza or AMX0035 and what it will mean to Americans living with ALS. And, you know, if Canadian health experts agree that AMX is safe and effective, then FDA should move swiftly to approve it. And so, you know, that, to me, that is right now the most, the thing that I'm most excited about. FDA is taking their own time, but every day matters, and we hope that they're able to make that decision in a positive manner soon.
Great. Thank you very much. And, you know, just to riff on that a little bit, I think the other, for the global audience, I think we should also reiterate that this is also, I believe, under review for the EMA. So that's another thing that is in process. And You know, I think all of us have had interactions with the company, and one of the things that they have really said is they're very actively trying to figure out how they can bring this to, not only do they have the Phoenix trial, which is hopefully going to confirm any effect, but trying to find avenues to be able to bring this anywhere. And I think the commitment of coming to Canada first was an example that they're really understanding. And I say this because it's the Alliance webinar here that they have really professed an understanding that, you know, people living with MND or ALS anywhere in the world are equally important. And so, you know, hopefully this is going to be a good precedent for companies moving forward, that they can find ways to be able to look everywhere in the world. And certainly we hope for our neighbors in the United States as well to be able to have that process move along. This is great because these are the types of things I think ALS MND needs, is the thought process of exactly what the Alliance is after all the time, which is, you know, everyone everywhere matters with ALS MND. Awesome, thank you. So Kathy has already introduced me. I'm going to go on the full nerd end of the spectrum here, and I'm going to talk about something that I find really exciting in ALS, and that's around the most common genetic variant in ALS called C9orf72. And there was a clinical trial. So let me quickly set here. There are two main hypotheses around this, which is that the mutations in the C9orf72 can cause someone to get ALS by an extra toxic function that is created. And I won't get into the details of that, but sort of it can cause extra things that aren't supposed to be there that cause your motor neurons to degenerate. And then there's another theory of thought that a reduction in the active levels of the protein, the C9orf72 protein, is not doing its job properly, and the motor neurons are suffering because of that. And so there was a clinical trial that many of you may know that finished a few months ago, that was run by Biogen and Ionis, that was really attacking or tackling one aspect of that gain of function hypothesis. And then it turned out, and the data was presented at the NCALS meeting, that this actually looked like it was not a good strategy. So from this first clinical trial, a phase 1 clinical trial, it ended up showing that there was actually increases in neurofilament in the biofluids, and that a trend towards people actually doing worse when they were on this, what's called an antisense oligonucleotide, to reduce the levels of C9orf72. And so, you know, one would say that typically a phase 1 clinical trial that stops and the program stops is not a good thing. But actually what it does is it tells us scientifically that maybe this isn't an avenue we want to put all of our cards in, and we want to start putting things into these other avenues. So that actually, for that to be a definitive answer early on is actually a really good thing for science and trying to evolve things more quickly. And I think I'm very excited about this because even with that other hypothesis, the loss of function hypothesis, there are drugs or therapies that are in clinical trial right now that are sort of trying to look at some of the things we found in the science around that aspect as well. So a company called AI Therapeutics has something called apilimod, which is from the work of Justin Achita and others, as well as Transposon have TPN 101, which is another therapy that's in, these are early stage clinical trials. So we don't know anything about them yet, but they're starting to look at whether or not the biology of this loss of function hypothesis might be the way to go. And I think that's also cool because it might tell us about other aspects of ALS, non-C9orf72 ALS, if they can do anything with these particular therapies. So I think the advancements in this clinical trial that has happened in C9orf72 and the ones that are happening now are really telling us something about how we translate from the basic science in the lab through to, you know, actually people living with the disease. So I'm very excited about where we're at with that, because I think we can make some really strong headway in that in the years to come. So never great when it's negative, but in this case, I think this could be really, really a positive. So, okay. So as I say that, we still don't have any questions. I have a number of things written down that we could talk about, but I see that Kuldip looks like he may have something he wants to say about it. No, he does not, because he just shook his head. Does anyone have anything burning on the of the four of us here that they would like to discuss? There's so much going on in ALS. We could talk more about collaboration. We could talk about the Healy trial. We could talk about trials in general. We could talk about some more nerdy science stuff. Otherwise, I'm happy to choose something and we can kind of riff on it. Called it? Yeah.
Yeah, David, I've thought of something. You know, the International Alliance have been coordinating workshops around genetics, and you know, this is a really exciting time. You know, because of the opportunities we have. I mean, think about it. Now we have, you talked about one of the genes, C9orf72, David, that is linked to the disease, but now we have close to 40 genes, 36 genes that are linked to the disease. And to me, that is a really exciting opportunity. You know, not because we can say there are 40 genes, but you know, maybe only 4 out of those 40 have been looked at for therapeutic purposes. And so we have, you know, the field has a lot to go. There's 36 other therapeutic targets to go after. And so the more biology we can build around these 36 targets, the more validation we can have that, you know, these targets could be targeted for therapeutic purposes. You know, that is really, really exciting around genetics. And sort of the other thing that's wrapped in there is, you know, we want to find more genes and we want to find people that have these genes, because if there is a particular genetic mutation and that's what's driving your disease, then if someone is developing a drug against that target, you could potentially be in a clinical trial, or if that drug is available, or ever gets to the market, if we're lucky, that you get access to that drug. And so, you know, this idea that, you know, the more we get people tested, and they know their genetic status is really important. And so I just, you know, wanted to start that conversation here.
Great. Gethin.
Yeah, as well as as we sort of I guess dissect the genetic architecture of ALS, as well as providing more candidate genes for drug development, it also gives us opportunities for better diagnostic algorithms as well. You know, if you have a series of gene markers that you think are correlated with ALS, you can put these together and develop an algorithm which gives you can give you a strong indication of disease. If you put that together with perhaps with other biomarkers such as neurofilament or very early symptoms, then you can perhaps diagnose or even predict the disease with a lot greater certainty. And another aspect of that, I think, which Gudjon just sort of popped a question in the Q&A box, is if we expand our genetic research to other populations around the world, you also as well as obviously helping those populations with the knowledge about their genetics, you increase your chances of identifying new gene mutations. And sometimes those very, very rare gene mutations that only happen in certain populations can identify completely new mechanisms for new drugs, new treatments, which has certainly happened in other diseases. So there's a real double benefit to expanding our genetic studies to all the populations around the world, to both help those populations and potentially help every population.
Great. Actually, and that gives me way too many places we could step off onto. I think, you know, from my end, one of the things about all these different genes that we've discovered is, you know, it's going to be great when we can find opportunities to be able to understand biologically what each one of these things might be doing, what an abnormality in the biology of each of these is doing, to look for common places that sort of says, whoa, motor neurons need this, or the cells around it need this to be healthy, because there are 4 or 5 or 10 different genetic causes of the disease that all sort of funnel through those pathways. And that's where we can really find therapies. But when it comes to, from the clinical sense, one of the things that will also help is there's so much in the genetic testing that gets done, and important why we have genetic counselors, I think, is because there's still a lot of things that we don't understand about the genetics. There are certain ones that we understand quite well, and that maybe that you can be involved in a clinical trial, or hopefully soon a potential therapy. But there's still so much we have to learn about, if you have a mutation in a particular gene, what does that mean for your family? And I think the Alliance has put forward a really strong effort to say we need to be able to properly counsel people as well, to say, it's very complicated. And so thinking about that, and stepping off into one of the avenues there, I know we had recently seen new data from tofersen. So this is an example of a genetic variant that someone could have in their family and access a clinical trial. In particular, this case, it's the Atlas clinical trial that is ongoing. But does anyone want to talk about the data that has been recently presented, or do you want me to just sort of highlight that and then we'll move on? Kuldip?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from Dr. Liu and as well. For Biogen, so again, just to level set for everybody, Biogen was doing a phase 3 tofersen trial, the Valor study, and had reported maybe a year ago, David, that it did not hit its primary endpoint in that the ALSFRS-R. But showed some really interesting biological effects, both on reduction of SOD1, as well as the biomarker that Gethin mentioned, neurofilament light. And so we already knew from that data that there was something that the drug was doing that we couldn't see the clinical effect in 6 months. Well, Biogen now looked at that data, long-term data, and has continued providing the drug even after the trial, and are looking at what kind of changes are happening. And what you see is that that 12-month data is showing that the earlier initiation of tofersen, the earlier you get started on this SOD1 therapy, you had declines in clinical and respiratory function, measures of clinical and respiratory function, and that strength and quality of life were also affected. And so, and on top of that, the effects on neurofilament light were robust and sustained. And so, this gives us, this is really exciting, one, because it may tell us that the earlier you get started, the earlier you can get someone on therapy. And I think this goes back to Gethin's and your point around people knowing their genetic status. If they know their genetic status, and if there's a drug like this that's available, and the sooner you can get on it, that the outcomes are maybe potentially better. So that, to me, from a tofersen data, was really exciting. But Dr. Liu, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you too. Here's a thing I've always been troubled. Yeah, when a patient come here, he has a familiar history for ALS. Well, if he has some very certain mutation in genes like SOD1 or C9 or FUS, well, we can for certain tell him that you have 50% of chance for you to have a normal child. But for some other genes like SETX or NXA11, we don't know. How can we tell our patients, well, maybe some functional test should be needed, but they don't have these resources to test whether it is a truly pathogenic mutation or just an SMP. So how do you, when you encounter that kind of situation, how would you explain to your patients?
Yeah, I think this really it highlights the complications in still how much we have to learn. And I think that, you know, the three of us are actually not MD. So in our particular case, I think we would, you know, this highlights the need to really have the ability of comfort in being able to determine what is a pathogenic mutation in something that we know, and then what are the things where maybe genetic counselors or can equip neurologists to be able to have the conversation about, you know, we're still trying to understand here. It's hard for us to be able to give a confident answer for you right now because the science is still evolving. Our understanding of what this means is still evolving. But if you have something like that, that's important to us, because the more we can learn, the better we're going to be able to help the next person. And it comes back to sort of what I said at the start, which is a lot of, you know, the things now are still trying to help people as soon as possible, but sometimes we just can't help people now if we don't fully understand those aspects of the disease. But I don't know how you know, is that it's not very helpful for you in the moment to have those. Yeah. And for the person, of course, it's incredibly distressing, I'm sure, to have these a variant of unknown significance or anything related to a gene mutation where it's not so clear. And how does this affect them downstream, for sure. Wow, we have Nick Cole, everybody. Surprise guest. It's like a cameo here. I'm going to quickly, my one thing I wanted to add about tofersen, if it's okay, is, you know, the data is available. So if anyone wants to go have a look, it's on the Biogen website. And one of the things I think is super cool and very obvious, and you can look for this, is that when people who were on the placebo were switched to the open label, you see some changes that we've never seen before in ALS trials, like muscle strength and other things now that have been sustained over, you know, several months, where it's actually a rebound in some of these cases. And that, to me, it's very striking compared to what we've seen before. You know, usually when they go on open label extension, there's a decline continuing in most of these things, and that might change based on going on the open label. But in the case of this, you know, some of the measures are quite clearly rebound, and that's pretty unprecedented in my mind. But you know, I haven't read every clinical trial out there. Nick, did you want to introduce yourself and maybe say something that what's on your radar right now with regard to research?
Sure. Thanks for letting me join. It's great to be here again. Yeah, so I'm very optimistic, if not very busy, with the fact that we seem to have many more clinical trials in the pipeline. We may get to a point where we have more clinical trials than people to fill them. So that's not a great problem to have, or maybe a great problem to have. So that's something that's happening. On the back of COVID, there's been quite a lot of delays, and it's been very difficult to keep the trials going. And that has happened, and we've learned a lot of things in terms of remote monitoring and that kind of thing. So we're trying to get back up to speed now. And all of the trials that have been planned are about to go live. Certainly in the UK, we have quite a few lined up. So hopefully, we're not there yet, and we desperately need an answer and an effective treatment. But there's certainly lots of interest, lots of industry taking up the fight, trying to find answers and set up trials. So hopefully in the future, those will all be recruited, and everyone will get access to be able to take part in research, which is what we all want, to find an answer.
So Nick, if we are approaching a bit of a problem where we might be not having enough, it'd be difficult to recruit patients into trials. Is that like a role for the Alliance then to look at potentially running trials in different countries where there is I guess an untapped population of MND-ALS patients?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, we try to do that now, and we are all working collaboratively as best we can, and we can improve that internationally. You know, countries are recruiting all over in Europe, America, and UK to trials. So that's a model that's already begun, but there are certainly untapped places where people could take part in trials that certainly don't have the opportunity to do that right now. You know, the ones that exist at the moment that come to mind, there are several, but through, say, the TriCals platform, the Magnet platform, that's across centres in Europe and the UK participating in trials. There's lots of other examples across the world, but yeah, we need to work together, and that's one of the goals of the Alliance. Really, is to try and do that international collaboration and reach everybody. And obviously, the larger the trials, the more people, the wider the criteria, the more chance we have of being successful in finding effective treatments.
Great. Yeah, I can hear some of our South American colleagues saying, come to South America with trials, because I know there have been some ALS trials there as well. And Asia, for sure, there's probably a lot of sites that are really trial ready and trial capable. And that, you know, I think the Sanofi trial, for example, is in China and Japan, as well as Europe and in North America. So maybe this is also setting some precedent to have really truly global trials that aren't considered global just because they're Europe and North America. So it's a great thing to bring up, both of you, for sure. Thank you. Okay, so one of the questions we had was around a comparison between the efficacy of AMX35, riluzole, methylcobalamin, which is the recent vitamin B12 Uber dosing, and edaravone. So does anyone want to talk about that at all? Or we'll do a 10-second look around, and if anyone doesn't say anything, I'll just start talking. Okay, Kuldip.
Yeah, I don't understand sort of the question, but maybe I'll try to answer it this way. You know, it's difficult when you're comparing across the board with, you know, these are drugs that have different mechanisms of action. They have been tested at different times. You know, edaravone was, you know, the trials were happening in 2016, 2017. So, you know, you're kind of talking of different things, but I think what I'm understanding, and I think where maybe the question is going is, you know, what does this mean in relation to the effect? You know, are they same? Are they different? And the way I would put this is, we need to significantly transform the experience of living with ALS. And while we look for a cure, we need to find these treatments that may not be cures, but they may have a 25, 30, 35% effect. Because, you know, and I always take this back, David, to the HIV world, right? There's no cure there. But in the HIV space, you have 36 therapies that people can take that extend their lives. And, you know, they are not cures, but they are treatments that work 30% here, 10% here, 20% here, but in aggregate have a tangible effect on both life and quality of life. And so that's the model for ALS. It's not that we're comparing riluzole to edaravone to Albrioza. The idea is that the more of those types of treatments that we can get on the market, even if they work in incremental manner, those incremental effects will add up. And so, you know, that's sort of, you know, how I view these different drugs.
Great. Thank you. I think that's some really good points. I know Gethin has just come off mute, and I would also be interested, Liu, in your thoughts as a physician who would potentially be prescribing some of these. Gethin, I think you were off mute, so maybe if you wanted to start.
Yeah, I thought, one way you perhaps can compare the drugs a little bit is with survival data. And but the challenges are that the original survival data from the riluzole study was from a long time ago, when sort of analysis study designs were very different. And the real world data says, I think riluzole gives you something like 9 to 18 months increase in survival benefit. But the Amylyx 35 data gives something similar, I think. Is that correct for the extended studies? 6 to 12 months.
6.5 months, I believe.
Yeah,
on the
so,
Centaur.
But I suspect with longer studies and real world data, we'll see a much greater survival effect there. But I think the critical point is what Kuldip was making, is that it's not about comparing one drug to another. It's probably how these drugs work in combination. If you take riluzole and you take Amylyx, will you get a benefit in addressing different systems, different pathways? Do you get that combined additive effect, which is really what we're hoping for in the near future, is to have a cocktail of treatments that can be perhaps modified for every patient, and almost each person has their kind of designer prescription of drugs. As we progress, and hopefully more drugs come through, more treatments come through the system. So you may not have that magical cure, but you will have like you said, a greatly increasing life until perhaps a cure is developed further down the line.
Great. Thank you. And Liu, as a physician who would be prescribing these. Yeah.
Hi, David. For this subject, I have some opinion. I think no matter what kind of drug, for like chemical therapy, that is, if not getting worse, is a good news. So survival is very important. Yeah, it's very important standard. Well, for SMA treatment, now we got like gene therapy. We observe that patients may not improve in their like strengths, but they don't progress. They don't getting worse. That's a good news. Well, just like if there is a war, when we want to rebuild our home, we have to find some other kind of therapy. That is maybe cell therapy later on, after this therapy, and then we can seek for other kind of therapy to treat like for cells, neural cells, motor neuron cells that have been dead, for reconstruct. Yes, one medication may not have all kind of effect. That is my opinion. So I always encourage my patients, if there is some kind of treatment that may stop your disease to progress, yes, that's a good news.
Great, thank you. And actually on that point, there's a question from Bruce Virgo on any trials underway that are planned to combine approved drugs. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me would be that, as things are approved in a wider array of areas, then new trials tend to balance out by allowing people to be on all of the standard of care therapies that are in the trial sites where they're chosen. So for example, I guess the Centaur trial with AMX 35 had individuals who were both on riluzole and on radicava. And so, as time goes on, theoretically, we would be looking at over and above these combinatorial drugs in different ways. But that's again where size of trials can be difficult to really decipher some of this because, you know, if the trials are smaller and you only have a subset of people who are on all the standard of care drugs, it's hard to be able to suss that out with ALS. But certainly this is something that I think we can, over time, we can really start to understand the combinatorial effects even through that mechanism. But maybe, I don't know if anyone knows of any pointed trials that are really focused on measuring, I guess in the same way as multidisciplinary care versus just a neurologist was a way that someone, you know, was able to look at areas where it's being done in one type versus the other, and compare. You know, I guess there could be some sort of study that looks at people who don't have access to those therapies versus those who do in a longer term sense, which we just can't know at this time. Anyone, Gethin?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you were saying, because riluzole is the current standard of care, it would actually be unethical to actually test new drugs on patients without riluzole or ask them to step off it. So it's going to be very hard to do that exact comparison. But I think what we will see is that, as you say, more combinations of drugs will be trialed. And as we have drugs available, I suspect individual neurologists also will start prescribing different drugs to patients. And it may be more real world data than actual trial data that starts to telling us what works best. It's a bit of a, I guess, an ethical minefield there of, you know, if something works, you don't want to stop people taking something that works to test how it works with something else. I mean, it's incredibly complex. So I think that will come out with real world data.
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point in terms of riluzole. It took a long time to be able to get to the point where we can see something beyond the clinical trial data from many decades ago that kind of shows in real world that this is actually having a potentially greater effect than we've been giving it credit for. So, you know, with other types of care, I think you're right. I think it's just going to be probably, unfortunately, early to tell right now. But, you know, this is why, and Kuldip was talking about this, is the urgency to sort of, if something is giving a signal and we can get it confirmed, then, you know, these are the ways that we can add on over time to help people hopefully have a more significant effect with combinatorial therapies. Okay, so unless someone has another burning thing to talk about, I have a couple of things. I don't know if anyone wants to talk particularly about, so it had been mentioned about more personalized treatment. There is a clinical trial going on right now called the Prelude Trial, which is actually looking at people who have a specific genetic subtype as sort of a biomarker to be entered into the trial. So there's a lot around something called UNC13A that people have heard about. The other one, and I'll give you a multiple choice here and see who comes off mute, is we had talked about gene discovery, and there's actually one of the things we've done in genetics over the years is really looked at such a small percentage of our whole genome. So what's called the coding region of our genome, which is like, what, 2% or something. And there's some research that came out just a few months ago by from the lab of Aaron Hornstein, Chen Aiten, I believe she won an award at NCALS, where she looked at the other aspect, the 98% of what we used to call junk DNA, and actually found an alteration in people that when you have it, it actually conferred a longer survival with ALS, or a less risk of ALS. So, you know, that's very exciting. It kind of says that we have a lot more to look at beyond what we've just been able to look at over this time. Does anyone have anything else? Like, those are things that I find very exciting in the research recently. Happy to keep riffing on those. Does anyone have anything else that kind of comes up, or else I'll move on to what Gethin was talking about and thinking about some more globalization pieces. Okay, so Gethin, you had brought up about one of the exciting things was that the group in the UK had managed to get a £50 million commitment to a center of excellence for M&D research. You talked about the Act for ALS. I personally am thinking that when we're thinking about globalization, besides what the Alliance is doing and trying to think about, the whole world, whole genomes are something that, there is an effort underway to try to pool global resources of these into one manageable sort of mineable pool through efforts of Project Mine and then ALS Compute with John Landers and Brian Traynor, the New York Genome Center, all of these groups coming together and collaboratively sharing. Does anyone have any other groups or thoughts of ways in which we're starting to bring things together in ALS where it's not siloed, but we're really starting to think in a more collaborative sense? Nick.
Yeah, well, you touched on the United to End MND campaign, which I think is a fantastic model that can be applied, hopefully, across the world. And working together is really the only way that we can make these breakthroughs, sharing information, etc. And this is something that the MND Association in the UK has campaigned for around 2 years. To we realised that we're working really hard, and our community is raising funds for MND research to answer these really important questions. And it was pretty clear that the government was giving only around about £5 million specifically to MND research, which was really a drop in the ocean in terms of neurological research. And we all know that the effects of that limited funding makes things very difficult, and there are ramifications in terms of the costs for care and treatment for people as well. So a real great thought process came together, involving people with MND who came up with the concept, the clearly obvious concept. 6 universities, the 3 charities in the UK, the Manning Doddy Foundation, MND Scotland, LifeArc, all came together with this concept that we can form this virtual institute and get the funding from the government if we show this united front that we can really make a significant difference. So a lot of work and both from academics, the charities, ourselves, and also our community has gone to put this campaign together. And we've had some really good impact from politicians as well, who are connected with MND and high up in Westminster in the UK. And so we've actually had a seat at the table and the right conversations, and we were promised by Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, and the Cabinet that we would get this £50 million over 5 years, which is going to cut through lots of red tape and allow us to set this thing up. So we haven't actually seen the money as yet, but that's something that's we're in process, and the campaign goes on. And on the back of that, we've actually managed to launch a few other things where we've started off to show proof of principle that we can all work together in this united way. So that's a really important thing, and it's going to move us to making breakthroughs within years rather than decades. Is really where we're at with this. So it's something that certainly could be adopted internationally, and I know we've been talking with Australia about how they may be able to do that over there. So it's a real positive step in the right directions that charities can all work together as we have done in the past, and also unite with university and academia to really make a big difference. So it's a phenomenal outcome when the money arrives, which and hopefully that will be a model that everyone else can adopt. So yeah, a real positive, and hopefully it'll make a huge difference.
Great. Yeah, as incredible collaborative effort between the community and organizations and academia in the UK, really a model for all of us. We have Dr. Adriano Chio with us today. Hey, how are you? Thank you for joining.
Sorry for the delay.
No problem. Could you introduce yourself? I think you don't need too much of an introduction because most people know you, but if I introduce you, it may take me 10 minutes to get through all the accolades.
No. I will be very fast. I'm Adriano Chio, neurologist in Torino, Italy. So that's all. I have been working on ALS in the last 25-30 years. That's all.
So your hand is up. Is this about the collaborative question that we had, or is there something else in particular that you kind of wanted to mention in terms of where you're excited with ALS MND research right now?
Well, no, we are really excited because a lot of clinical trials is ongoing, and we are starting to have some positive results, or at least some good direction about that. There is also a huge international collaboration, really. Probably not enough. I was listening to what is happening in UK. That's very good, but we need international collaboration in general. We have some opportunity in Europe related to the Horizon 2020 and the other European projects. So we are working on that, but that's not again enough. What we need to is to have a real international collaboration involving the largest number of centers in the world, putting together what we have. And to have another point is very important is starting to we are starting to have also good databases that are with a free access, but not completely true for most of them, really. So that's another point that we need to work on, and because it's the only way to have the possibility to start new ideas using this data. So there is a lot of positive things. There are a lot of positive things, but anyway, we need to improve that. But we are never happy if we are not going to defeat the disease. So that's a point, a very important aspect that we have to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the amount of the feeling now in terms of globalization of ALS efforts and the connection points that exist between groups in Asia and Australia and Europe and North America are so much stronger even now than they would have been 5 years ago, and way stronger than 10 years ago. And so, and the Alliance is really pushing to try to have this as well, and to make connections between all of these groups and the individuals, the key opinion leaders. I think it's pretty exciting moving forward how much everyone is thinking about collaboration in terms of getting to an end goal of everybody, which is, a better day for people with ALS MND. Dr. Liu, I think, did you have, I think you looked like you were going to say something, and I wasn't sure if you were interested to say something to that or not.
Yeah, recently I found that if a patient is also, or he has a relative, but this patient may have great influence in society. Like if he may create a foundation, he may push the government to pay attention to the disease. Well, this kind of NGOs formed by patients and collaborative with doctors can push our disease like medication or investigation very fast, very quickly. In China, there is several this kind of examples. I think they are very important strengths.
Okay. Thank you. There is another question. Oh, I actually may have missed yet another question I just see, but there was another question, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about before, but now that we have Dr. Chio here, it might actually be a nice addition to that. And it's really around, when we talk about 40 or so genes or many different genetic causes of ALS or risk genes for ALS, the question was around how many of these or what's known about those that are primary causes of the disease that we can sort of nail down versus ones that, we're less confident about at this point. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, but now we have a world expert on that here. So perhaps I can pass that over to Dr. Chio.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, but the answer is probably not so great. Will be not so great. But the point is that we are discovering a lot of genes, and probably more are coming. Some are clearly established, some are not. The point is that some could be also private genes. I mean, they could interest a very single family or few families in a country. But for most of them, we have not clear proof of the fact that they are really pathogenic or really important in the pathogenesis of ALS. So one of the efforts that is ongoing is to discuss using the data we have now to understand which genes are real genes, which are not real genes, or are less important. On the other side, there is one problem that is not being touched at the moment, is the interaction between these genes, because we really don't know what happens if the patient has a major gene together with a minor gene, if there is an effect on the course of the disease, on the phenotype, I mean the clinical characteristic of the patient. And again, this is something that we can do only putting together the data from different areas and centers, because these are, some of these genes are really rare. So a single center or few centers cannot give an answer to that. This has a huge effect on the genetic counseling. We have already discussed that several times, because if you are going to find a gene, a mutation in a gene which is not clearly established, that can be a real problem for the communication to patients and also for the response, I mean the emotional response of patient to that. So it's an area that is developing. I think will be in a good situation in a very short, relatively short time, 2 or 3 years. But we have a lot of work to do on that.
Great, thank you for that. Oh, Gethin's off of mute. Okay, you have a minute.
Yeah, okay, just one additional level of complexity there is also that people's genetic makeup may also affect their microbiome, which is an area where we're really only just starting to look at basically your bacteria in your gut, how they affect, do they affect disease? We don't know, but we certainly know that genetic mutations can affect your gut bacteria, which may affect your disease, just to add an extra level of complexity when you're considering the genetics of disease. And that is something that's starting to be studied now, but it's a very big field as well.
Dr. Ching, Liu Ching, you came off mute, so I want to give you the opportunity if you have something to say for about 30 seconds. Sorry, we're getting close.
Thank you. I think, yeah, we have a lines that is very important, and we can tell our patient what is going on. Thank you, David.
Okay, great. Adriano, are you able to say anything about the Tudka trial that's happening in about a minute, about your thoughts on that? There's a specific question around the Tudka trial.
Yeah, Tudka trial is a trial that is being funded by the European Union and is ongoing. The recruitment of patients is finished, so we are going to have the final results in 6 months probably. Obviously, we hope it will be positive, but we don't know at the moment. So it's ongoing. It's still ongoing, the trial.
Wonderful. Okay, so now here is where I'm just going to ask if anyone has any 30-second thing. Otherwise, I'm going to take a chair's privilege to say something that I'm going to end on a piece of hope here. So one of the things that I find most exciting, and I'm been in the field as long as some of the individuals on the panel, Adriano, for example, is how fast things are going now from discovery to trial. And we're in a year where we're going to see something called Stathman-2 that's going to have an ASO going to try to restore its levels. We just talked earlier about, I talked briefly about a PIK5 inhibitor. That was some research that came out a couple years ago. And what we're starting to see are things that are coming directly out of ALS M&D research discovery and to trial very quickly. And this is something, you know, for many years, we've had things that are surmised to work on certain mechanisms in ALS. And now we're getting things that come directly out of ALS MND research, and they're getting to trial within a few years. And we've seen all these companies that are driving forward into clinical development. I know, Kuldip, you've said more shots on goal sometimes. And so I think that's incredibly exciting, is to be able to see now some of these targets that go, ooh, that's exciting. That target's kind of exciting. And I would like to see what's going to happen there. And so I hope you all share in that with me. If anyone doesn't, just like, I don't know, come off and say you're wrong, but you only have 10 seconds to do it, because I am now supposed to pass off to Kathy to wrap us up. So thank you, everyone. And I'm so grateful to be able to pass off this chair duties for the next time we do this to my great colleague, Gethin Thomas. So thank you all for showing up today. And Kathy, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. And David is too modest to be able to say some of the things that are in the Q&A in the chat, which is a big thank you to the Scientific Advisory Council for the work they do all year, and for putting this panel on twice a year to answer questions in the community about what's happening in scientific research. So a huge thank you to the SAC and to those who were able to join as panelists today for this very important update, which we try to time around Global Day. Global Day is June 21st for awareness of ALS MND. And that's why we do a mid-year update on what's happening in research. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the SAC as a whole. And once again, thank you to Biogen for sponsoring this webinar series. Have a great day, everyone, or evening.